it's really common to think that you have some control over their life. In reality, we might have a lot of influence, but we don't actually control a lot of things. And so foster care is a very big wake-up call because you don't control anything.
I had a conversation with someone earlier this morning about the joy of opportunity. Not necessarily that you have to work in an office or you have to work from home, but to be able to have the luxury of doing what you want, when you want, where you want.
Yeah.
I'd imagine you probably appreciate some of that too, especially you got 4 kids, right?
Yes, we do. We have 4 children. Yeah.
It's a good amount of kids right there. That should keep you on your toes.
Yeah, definitely. It was a big switch. My wife and I have a pretty, I guess, non-traditional story when it comes to having kids. But we went from 1 to 2 to 1 to 4. So, it's pretty, it's a lot easier when you have less kids. Man-to-man defense, and then making the switch over to zone. It can be a little bit of a paradigm change, but I think we got it down pretty good.
I love that. I've never heard it described that way, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I love that. And you guys adopted your kids, right?
We did. We adopted through the foster care system. We were licensed in 2016. I guess that's the beginning of the story. And my wife was actually the first one licensed. So when she got licensed to foster, we weren't together. We hadn't even met yet. And we got set up on a blind date. And it's one of those like watershed moments, right? Where from the initial conversation that we had, I knew that there was something special about her. And I really felt that God had put it on my heart to press in and pursue after her with whatever it took. And it was a little bit different of a situation, right? She was licensed and she was looking to receive foster placement, and we started dating. And so I was a part of that process and started getting all the certifications I needed to keep hanging out with her, right? So if I could be around when there were kiddos in the house. And so after she got a placement, I think originally there's probably a little bit of doubt inside, right? Where you're like, can I really love a child that is coming from somewhere else, right? Like, do I have that within me? And I think a huge part of my personal story has been involved in foster care and working in that environment, both as a foster parent, but also professionally. I had a period of time when I was working in social work as well. And so, the Lord really grows and stretches you as you come to realize what it looks like to really like lay down your life for someone else.
Right.
The comforts that you have, the conveniences that you have, right, which is going to be the same for all parents. Once you have kids, your life changes. But there's a special thing about foster care in that it's really common when you have, I guess you would say, a lot of people might say like biological children or natural born children. It's really common to think that you have some control over their life, when in reality, we might have a lot of influence, but we don't actually control a lot of things. And so foster care is a very big wake-up call because you don't control anything in that process of a child coming to stay and live in your home. You don't get to make hardly any decisions about what happens for them. And so it really challenges you to start thinking about who is in control of this child's life. Whose child is this? Right? You grow to love that child, but you're constantly reminded that, well, this was God's child first.
Right.
And what he decides to do in and through their life is going to be up to his sovereignty, and I'm just along for the ride. And so, it's just been a journey of learning what it looks like to submit to the will of God in that process, to love who's in front of me, the best I have with all I have, and to trust him with the rest. because it doesn't always work out really well just because you have a lot of love. um, so yeah, but to answer your question, yeah, we have 4 kids, and they're all under the age of 10. So we got 10, 7, 3, and 3. We got twins at the bottom of the age bracket. So they give me a run for my money for sure.
That's awesome. I love that. And I love too, especially how you kind of talk there about really just loving people, kids or people. I mean, it's really interchangeable because kids are people, but
Yeah.
for conversation's sake,
Yeah,
but just
yeah.
loving people for who they are and where
Mm.
they're at, and not necessarily being so worried about the control aspect of it, and really just
Mm-hmm.
showing up as your best self in their lives, and
Yeah.
hey, giving them a positive influence of what it looks like to be a humble,
Mm.
good servant, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's an amazing example. So before we get any further, just tremendous honor to you for doing that, because
Oh, well,
it's not easy, and I
yeah.
can't even imagine personally the struggle of going
Mm.
through it all, especially in scenarios where you have a kid and then you don't have a kid, right? That's it's unfathomable to me personally.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate that process?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say it takes a lot of trust, right? Because especially from my vantage point with my wife and I, and then a lot of the people that I've worked with in social work. So I was a part of a nonprofit foster agency. It was a faith-based organization, which was the same one that my wife and I were originally licensed to foster with. And so, that's been a big component of it, and it's been a big component for a lot of people is that faith aspect, where they really feel that as they read the Bible, there's a clear call to care for orphans. And foster children essentially are the modern day orphan. And so there's a lot tied up in that, right? Where people feel spiritually convicted to get involved. And you often feel the language or hear the language of, I feel called to do this, right? That God is asking me to do this. And so there's an extra weight involved when you start bringing that component in.
Yeah.
And I think it's not right and it's not wrong necessarily. It's definitely what I identified with, right? I think my wife and I both felt that God was inviting us into foster care, right? Calling us to open our home to kids who needed a place to be safe. And so there can almost come with this an expectation, right? I'd say it's pretty common to be like, okay, well, like if God's asking me to do this, and like I better do it. And so if you're not careful, that invitation can kind of be skewed into this like unhealthy obligation, right? Like, oh, well, I have to do it. And so it kind of brings out a lot of interesting internal struggles, the things that maybe you thought you had already dealt with. And I think if I were to kind of think over my entire foster care journey, right, I think that's been a common theme, is thinking that I had things down. I'm like, oh, I've dealt with that, or I've mastered that, or I'm pretty good at that, only to be faced with my own shortcomings time and time again. Because a lot of times kids are like a mirror, and they kind of reflect back to you some of the really good things about you, but also some of your maybe shortcomings or inadequacies, the things that you're frustrated with about yourself. I start to see those in my kid, and it makes you come to terms with those things. And so, I think a huge part of what I've learned about parenting through foster care is, man, I'm going to have to be honest about those things within myself, right? Whether it's, you know, all of a sudden being like, man, I'm really frustrated at what my kid is saying or doing. And it's real easy to just kind of be like, okay, well, they're annoying, or they're disobeying, or what is it about this situation that's really bothering me? And what can I do about that? Right? What can I address within myself, whether it's fears about the future, whether it's my own relationship history, where now I'm reminded of things that happened with my parents or things that I went through as a kid, and now I'm really feeling that emotional experience, and I'm interpreting what my kid is doing through that. And so, I think navigating through our time in foster care really was just being laid open to all the things that you don't want to admit about yourself. Because going in, I was very confident. I have training in marriage and family therapy. I have seminary training. Right, I was working in full time ministry at the time when we started fostering. I had connections around town. We had family support. We had so much resource going into the foster care journey. I had a lot of confidence. I was like, this is probably the best possible home that any kid could ever walk into. We have anything that a kid could ever need, right? We have physical resources, relational resources, spiritual resources. We have the knowledge and experience. My wife is also a licensed therapist, right? It's just, there's so much that we have to give, right? We have to give a child. And then you get humbled really quickly, right? That, the desire to serve, the desire to love, right, is important, right? But it's going to take more than that, because, in my experience and in my opinion, foster care, right, if you don't have some kind of, faith or trust in that higher power, and for me that's faith in Jesus, then you're not going to make it very far, because like you said, it is really hard and it's really challenging, and so to constantly wrestle with that normal human desire to try and bring order and control, right, to your family, to your home, to your situation, and not being able to, whether it's because you have regulations by the government, or a foster agency telling you what you can and can't do. You literally don't have that much power to make changes in the life of this child. You have all the responsibility, but none of the actual authority. It's a tough process, right? And that brings an emotional toll, right? And I think a lot of times, maybe it's just me, as men, the emotional side of things is not necessarily the realm that we want to go to first. That's not necessarily our first response of well, how are you feeling about that? And so when it becomes difficult, it's easier to try to go external. I oh man, okay, what kind of project can I do? What can I accomplish? And so whether that's okay, it's really hard at home, so I'm gonna really push at work, right? I'm gonna try to feel successful. I'm gonna move into the areas that I do feel control in, or it becomes hyper focused on controlling children. Right? I'm gonna get compliance and behavior, and I'm gonna make sure that all these ducks are in a row so that I can feel a little bit more secure about my home life, right? Which can be a temporary fix for that feeling of insecurity and I don't know what's going to happen, and yet it's going to continue to be there. It doesn't go away just because I'm going to focus on something else. It can help me in the short term, but it's not really helping me in the long term. And so, I think what I almost say been forced to do, right? Because I think I went in really confidently. And if you don't take a humble approach to things, you will be humbled at some point, right? And so, I think what I've been forced to do is to accept, okay, yeah, I can't do it all, and I'm not perfect. Even though I've had lots of experience working with different populations, even though there's ministry and seminary training, there's therapist, right? Even though I have all of the credentials to be able to do this, that doesn't mean I'm going to be able to do this perfectly. And I need to be willing to open myself up to let God work in and through me and what he wants to do in the life of his kid. This was his kid first. And he's trusted me to help take care of that. And so it's like a constant daily reminder of positioning myself under the sovereignty of God in the correct way. I think I have agency, right? God has given me the ability to steward these kids. Right? He's entrusted me to raise them up and train them well, right? Make sure that they get what they need, make sure that they learn right from wrong, right? Like there's things that he's called me into in that process. But at the end of the day, like I'm not the one in control. And that's hard to admit um, for anybody, but it was hard for me, right? And so I think like getting through that process, so a lot of key factors. My wife and I had to be on the same page all the time because if we weren't communicating, if we didn't know what was happening, things got more stressful. And so now, you talk about that feeling of things being out of control. Well, now, like the relationship that was most important to me feels out of control because we haven't communicated or been on the same page. So we had to make sure that we were communicating well and often, and not just like logistically on all the appointments and visitations and the things that were coming up, but like what's going on, right? How are you really doing with this? Because that's important, right? And then also, it's really easy to try and tackle these kind of things on your own. Like, well, God called me into this. Like, I need to be the one to do this. But without a community of support, we would not have made it. we would not have made it. So, like, thank God we were connected to a really strong community of people that understood what we were going through. Right? There were other people that knew what it was like, because parenting kids from the foster care system can be completely different than in a lot of ways. And so, they're like well-intentioned people that are trying to give you advice, and it's like, all right, if that worked, we tried that like years ago, right? Like we tried that like a long time ago. If that worked, we would have kept doing that. But being around people that understood was life-giving, because when you're going through the struggle, no matter what it is, right? So in our case, it was foster care. In other cases, right, it could be anything. It could be unemployment. It could be marriage struggles. Whatever it is, when you're going through that valley, it's a very isolating feeling. Like I'm in this alone. And then I don't know, maybe it's a guy response, maybe it's just me. Like, all right, I got to buckle down and just kind of like lower my head and get through it. Right? Like I've got to find a way. I got to do this. I got to take care of it. But being able to have people support you is life-giving. Oh, I don't have to do it by myself. And that takes a shift as well, right? Because you can get into a pattern of wanting to, or getting used to like, I got to do this on my own. Right? I can't really ask for help. I gotta kind of take care of it. And that can be tied to all kinds of things. But I think thinking through like, well, how do you manage all that? How do you navigate all that? You need other people to help you. One, because it's tiring. Right? Sometimes you just need a break, and in foster care, especially, not just anybody can babysit your kids, right? So you have to like have special people that are licensed or certified to do that. But also, emotional support, that's a big deal, right? People come alongside you, live life with you, being able to admit like, okay, yeah, I do need some help, is a challenge. But once you get into that spot and you allow other people in, you're able to go much farther than you were before. So I think that was a huge factor as well, is we had a group of people who were all going through the process at the same time. And so we had similar experiences that kind of helped us bond together, and we could all go over to each other's house, and our kids could get together and play together, and nobody was too worried about it, because we all were on the same page.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, if I could. First of all, thank you for sharing all that, because that was a lot, and I probably have 87 follow-up questions from all the things that you just covered. But the first one I want to dive back into is your relationship with your wife.
Hmm.
in regard to priorities,
Yeah.
right? So for you, what is the proper order between wife, yourself, your children? Like, where does that fall in a priority list?
Yeah, I think in the ideal situation, like relationship priority would be like for me, it's relationship with Jesus, relationship with my wife, and then comes my kids. Right? But in the hecticness of life, sometimes those things seem to get like scattered, and then you like try to pick them all back up, and they don't always fall back in that order.
Yeah.
Right?
So I see a
Um,
lot of people put it the other way around. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't consider their faith in that at all. It's just kind of
mhm.
like this thing that they get to when they have time.
Right.
Then they put their kids first, and then whatever's left, they give to their spouse, and they wonder why things are messy, right? And they
Yeah.
feel like, man, my kids are the most important thing. We
Mm.
got to take care of the kids, right? They need
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z, especially for this time frame. But I've always found, at least personally, that when you put your spouse above your kids, which
Mm.
sounds harsh to say, because like these are your
Right.
kids, you want to give
Yeah.
everything for them, but you're able to come at it together. First
Mm.
of all, it strengthens your relationship with each other because, hey, in 18 years, they're going to be gone and then you
Right.
still have each other left.
Yeah.
But it allows you to really attack the situation together, right?
Hmm.
Like you mentioned before, when you're playing zone defense, a
Yeah.
tremendous part of that is knowing your teammate, what they're going to
Mm.
do, communication style. Like if you don't know how your teammate plays, you're going to run into each other, and that's not going to end well. Right?
Right.
But yeah, I love the way that you said that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, and it's hard to do, right? Because, like you said, kids do demand a lot of attention, right? They demand a lot of time and energy, right? That I mean, they're kids. That's kind of part of the deal, right? How they learn and grow, like they need you to do it, right? Like they need it. And I think it's really easy for people, especially parents, to think, well, I have these kids and I have to give them everything because you want the best for them. And sometimes, again, too much of a good thing kind of gets skewed, right?
Yeah.
Where we start off with these great intentions and you have these passions for your kids and you want them to grow and develop well and be successful in life. But when they become your only priority, then you lose a little bit of yourself, right? And our kids are really only going to grow into the like their capacity to be great is going to be like on your capacity to be great. Like
Yeah.
your kids are only going to be as good as you are. And so like on those days when you're having an off day, right, like your kids are also going to be off because they need kind of the model from you.
Yeah.
And so if you aren't taking care of you and you're not taking care of your relationship with your spouse, you're not really giving them your best. It may feel like you're giving them everything, but you've lost something along the way, and you're not really giving them like your best.
Right.
You're trying a lot, and it may feel like you're spinning your wheels a lot, okay? Which is a normal parenting experience, whether you're in foster care or not.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm wondering your perspective on this one because I'm really just thinking this through in real time. But sort of as you were talking there, I'm thinking a lot of parents want the best for their kids. And because of that, they want to really hyper control every input that their
mm,
kid receives. Um, and, when you were talking before about how you don't necessarily have control over a lot of the things that, your kids are going to be forced to do or kind of go through, it almost makes me wonder if that gives you a little bit of an advantage in a weird
mm,
way where you're relieved of the expectation that you can control all the inputs your kids receive. So you just have to focus on what you can control, right? Because I
mm,
think a lot of parents are going to really overly try and control every single possible thing that their kid can receive. And instead of just being a good example, right, they try and really manipulate the system so that they
mm.
get the output that they want rather than just being a good example in the first place. Do you sort of
Yeah,
see it the same way?
yeah. No, I would agree. It's something that my wife and I have talked about a lot. Is that we have been given, I don't know if it, like you said, a slight advantage in that way, because we were forced to come to terms with you have no control. Right? It doesn't
Yeah.
mean we still didn't try. It still doesn't mean it's not like a daily struggle of like trying to control even your children's behavior
Yeah.
when they
I think it
step
just
out of
makes it a little
line.
bit more clear, right? Because
Hmm.
it's almost like, when you have a kid, for me, they're like, you spend a couple days in the hospital and then they hand you your kid and say, see ya. Someone else
Yeah.
needs the room. Get
Right.
out. And then you're like, all right, well, now what do I do? Right?
Yeah.
You don't really have this set of rules to follow unless you have, an example that your parents gave you. That's the only
Right.
set of rules you got.
Hmm.
So, I think it almost makes it a little bit more clear what the boundaries are, right?
Mm. Yeah. And that comes with its own set of like pluses and minuses, right? So it's like they give you some with foster care. You have boundaries on what you can and can't do, which is frustrating in and of itself, right? Because all the like normal things you'd want to do, a lot of those you can't do, right? So even like how you structure your home and the things you're allowed or not allowed to have and where you're allowed to put it,
Wow.
which is like frustrating in and of itself. But yeah, I think you're right. I think a good metaphor that I've thought of with this is a lot of times, you want the best for your kids, but you kind of treat your kids like a balloon, right? And I don't know if your kids have ever had a balloon, but they probably popped it. And then their like world was shattered, at least for like the next 10 minutes because they're devastated, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, balloons are fragile. And we want to make sure that the balloon doesn't run into anything that it doesn't need to run into, and it's like nice to play with, but you once you become a parent, you're like, oh my goodness, there's so many dangerous things out there, and what kind of things are they running into at school, and what kind of things are they talking about with their friends, and what are they getting enough of this and that, right? And we kind of become so concerned that it's going to pop. Which is good. You want to be concerned for your kids, right? But when you have that much control, or you're trying to control all the inputs, one is super tiring, right? You're probably exhausted. But also, I'm not able to really develop in my kid the skills I want them to have and that they're going to need to have once they leave my house. That not just critical thinking, but also wisdom. Right? So, what would it look like to come alongside of my child and partner with them in navigating what they're going through? Right. And so, there's obviously going to be like things that you're going to tell your kid to do and not do. Right? Like, I mean, safety, that's going to be a priority. You're probably not
Yeah.
going to let your kids go like dance naked in the street, right? Like, there's going to be some clear boundaries. But when they encounter something, right, instead of immediately reacting and trying to control it, right, which comes from a desire of wanting to give our children good things, what may I be robbing them of if I'm
Mhm.
only focused on that? All right, well,
Yeah.
they might not have the chance to really think about this, like what natural consequences might come from whatever activity or thought or thing that they're doing. All right, how can I invite them into some reflection, even if they're little? Right? You know, trying to incorporate some behavior focused questions early on, not you know not in a condescending way of like, what do you think you're doing, right? But like, hey, what are you doing right now? Just kind of give them some pause so that they're kind of taking a second, like, what am I doing right now? Right? But also, like when they're talking with their friends at school or when something comes on TV, right, starting to ask questions about it instead of immediately trying to shut it down, so that we can build some skills in our kids where they're starting to navigate the world around them. Because by the time they leave our house, the world's going to be completely different.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be able to follow them around all over the place and protect them from everything. And if we keep that balloon mentality, right, anything could pop it. And I like to fall back on, scripture. That's a big part of my life. And the analogy that Jesus uses is a seed. And seeds, you bury them in the ground and you leave them out in the elements, and you expose them to things. And it's through that process that they begin to grow and develop. It isn't until we can, like, metaphorically lay it down,
Right.
bury it, right, put it to death, right? That whole die to self, that then they begin to grow. And so a seed and a balloon are very different. Both can be exposed to the same things, but, we're a lot more concerned about that balloon. So, yeah, I think when we change our mindset to also providing them these other good things that we want for them and trying to start putting that into practice now, right? How can I start helping you think through things and bring wisdom into your life now, as opposed to like, yeah, when you're older and you leave, like you can develop wisdom, but right now I need to know that you're safe. And
Yeah.
again, we want our kids to be safe. It's not wrong to want your kids to be safe. And of course, you're going to have those clear-cut rules and boundaries, right? But just inviting them into that process and engaging that with them is a lot different than like always controlling them. Because I don't know about you, but when I tell my kids there's something that they can't do, that's like the first thing that they're going to try to do. Right?
Yes.
It's the very first thing, whether it's right in front of me or they're going to wait till I'm not looking and then they're going to do that thing. Right. So,
Yeah. I love that. I love the balloon analogy. I have not heard that before. And the first thing it makes me think of is probably the safest thing to do to keep the balloon safe for a long time is to not blow it up.
Yeah.
But the act of speaking life into it, breathing air into the balloon, right, is what allows you to actually enjoy it in the first place. Because a balloon is pretty useless if you don't blow it up.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? But speaking life into it, literally breathing air into that balloon is what allows you to enjoy it in the first place. And I think that's, to carry that metaphor forward, a lot of what parents need to do for their kids is to speak life into their kids, right? Give them the opportunity to go out there into the world and go experiencing it.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's really easy to keep them safe by harboring them from everything.
Right.
But that's not what they were designed for. They were designed to go out and sow their own seed.
Yeah.
Right? To be able to go out there and create the life that they were designed to create and to go experience things. And obviously you want to protect them and give them a great example of how to make these decisions. And I think a lot of that comes from your willingness to die to self first and give them that example.
Yeah.
Right? If instead of saying, hey, this is dangerous, don't do it, they're going to go try it. But if you show them, hey, this is what dad does on the daily, and they're able to see you not just speak from theory, but speak from actual real, world example, right? And to follow what you do in the course of a day, and you're able to kind of take the pride and the ego away from it and show them, hey, this is what dad did today. Dad messed up. Okay, cool. Here's what I learned, right? And to see, the real humility side of what it takes to be a man. And I think that's a thing that a lot of us, we got a raw deal out of the example of men that we were given as kids. I would assume we're roughly the same age, and as we're kind of progressing now, there's been this talk of toxic masculinity.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there are really more toxic people. I don't even know that they're toxic. They're just in a spot where they just need some conversation. They need some salvation. They need some help.
Yeah.
But it's really encouraging to have these types of conversations. Because like you said before, as men, we don't default into emotions or conversation or, hey, I need some help.
Yeah.
But it's really not common to say, hey, what's up, bud? You mind if we grab a beer, go for a walk, have a conversation? I need to vent something to you. Or just, hey, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Right? You tend to maybe do a quick Google search, say, hey, it's all your fault, and then just go, tuck it away in a box somewhere and deal with it, walk it off. But, conversations like these, I think, is what gives people permission to feel their emotions, right?
Yeah.
You can still be a masculine man, right? You can still have an awesome beard and show up and be humble and have emotions and be a real person. And I think that that's an awesome example to set.
Yeah. I love what you said about admitting your mistakes and, especially to your kids and be like, hey, I messed up. And, this is what I'm learning from that. Because how hard, that's incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think very few people, but especially men, they don't want to admit that they're wrong. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake. Right? Like you said, we have so many examples around us on what it means to be a man or what men are supposed to do or expected to do that, language aside or, like hashtags aside, right, is just like, it's probably just not the best for human flourishing. Right? It's not allowing all of creation to continue to be good. And it really kind of it separates us from others. And not that men can't be independent and that they can't get things done. But like all the really great stories about people I mean, you think about, my kids are learning about World War II right now. I mean, you think about the men that sacrificed together, right? Those shows that we really connect with, like Band of Brothers, right? About that time period. It wasn't about a Lone Ranger, right? That was about a group of guys who relied on each other, and they wouldn't have made it without each other. And like all those really good stories that really hit home for us are all people that were willing to be on the team. Right? They were all willing to sacrifice something for somebody else, but also to be sacrificed for, right? To receive that help. They weren't just giving it; they were also receiving it, and that can be really hard, especially when it comes to being like, "Oh man, I messed up." Because we all, in addition to wanting the best for our kids, we probably want our kids to think that we know what we're talking about. And so it can be really easy to be like, well, I need to have it all together. I got to set this perfect example so that they can get it. But like you said, how many examples have we had growing up where people were like, I messed up, I was wrong, I stepped out of line, I should have handled it differently, or even apologized for the way that they did that. That isn't a huge example, I would say, for a lot of guys on how to admit mistakes or to even apologize for those mistakes.
Yeah.
And the power that can have in the life of your kid is actually scientifically proven to help them better develop a relationship with you, but also relationships with other people and their ability to like navigate tasks in the future. Right? So you're not necessarily giving them quote unquote permission to just go out and mess up all the time, but you are helping reinforce the idea that if they mess up, life isn't over. Right? It can go on, and we can look at what that looks like and how to do that. And so, and I think something else that you said, just kind of what we know from like social sciences and research on attachment theory, is we have what's called mirror neurons as a part of our human created design, in which all of our like emotions and experiences are constantly like scanning for other people who are feeling the same thing. And you even want to do this when you go somewhere and you see something really cool, or whether it's in nature or you run across a new experience. And a lot of times we try to take a picture of it, right? So that we're looking to share that experience, right? That emotion response that we have to, wow, like a great vista, right? Where you're just like, oh my goodness, look at that view. Or when you have some kind of really fun, exciting experience, right? And we're constantly projecting that out, looking for that to be mirrored back to us in another human being. And so when we cut ourselves off from that experience by being those like macho men who just don't talk about their feelings or don't share things and just get things done, we're actually like stunting our own further development scientifically, right? Which is fascinating to think about. But it becomes like really hard to do in practice, where it's like, okay, well, how do I open up and share that?
Yeah.
Because I got years of practice of not sharing it, and that's just a lot easier to do.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, especially, to me that makes me think of the aversion a lot of men have to submit to their wives. Right? Because a lot of people want to talk about the first part of that, right? They want their wives to submit to their husbands.
Yeah.
And they want to just stop right there because
Right.
that sounds cool.
Right.
Right. But they don't want to submit to their wives. And I feel like they feel like that is some level of weakness, right? That they're weak. They're not an alpha male if they do that. They want to be served. They want all this blah, 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 but they're not willing to be the example and be willing to be someone worth submitting to.
Yeah.
And I feel like you got to have the entire conversation. You can't just get
Pick
to
and
the
choose.
part that you want, right?
Yeah.
You really got to just, lean in and take the whole thing if you really want to just embrace it all and get the full value back out of it. And, I think that's a conversation a lot of men really got to have is, hey, you got to be something worth submitting to in the first place. And that's on you.
Yeah.
And, there's a conversation I had with a good buddy of mine 2 days ago. Because I shared on my social, no one's coming to save you, right? You got to be the hero of your own story. And he said to me, it's a dangerous thing to say because it could make people feel isolated and alone, and that, hey, no one is there for you.
Yeah.
And I said, I understand that, but let's dive a little bit deeper into it. People are willing to help you and come alongside of you,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, it is up to you and your free will to make the right choices to do it for yourself, right? So in my opinion, no one can be the one to save you except
Mm.
for you. You have to take responsibility for your actions and your decisions. Right?
Mm.
That's not to say that there won't be people who are willing to come alongside of you. And you should have that community, you should have that tribe, you should have that team of people there to help you, to give you example, to give you support. Right? You want to be equally yoked.
Mm.
You don't want to be doing this alone.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you still have to be responsible for the decisions you make. And
Hmm.
hey, you can't put it off on someone else.
Yeah.
It's your decision, your responsibility to take that forward and to steward the life that you've been given well,
Mm.
if you want to reap the rewards.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I think responsibility and accountability are huge measures of like maturity, right? As a man grows, is he taking responsibility for his actions? Is he being held accountable for the things he's saying and doing? I think that speaks a lot about who a man is. You think about that idea. I agree with what you said about submission too. I mean, I think in today's cultural context, the word submission probably gets closely associated with like MMA, right? And it's like if you're going to submit, if you're going to tap out, then you've lost.
Right.
But that's not, really the same thing that we're talking about. Right? Like you said, if you finish out the whole phrase, wives submit to your husbands, and husbands love your wife as Christ loved the church. Christ died for the church. Right? Christ carried a
Yeah.
cross for the church. Right? Christ went through hell for the church. Right? Christ got down in the dirt for the right. Christ served. Like there's a lot that goes with that. And I love what you said about being somebody worth submitting to. I think that's a good question for anybody to reflect on. Like what does it mean? Like what would be a good person to submit to? Like who would I be willing to submit to? What kind of person is that? What does that look like in my life? I think that's a great question for personal growth for sure.
Yeah. I think that there's a responsibility to go first in that,
Hmm.
right? Because a lot of people are, from my experience, wanting the other person to submit first. They're wanting the other person to kind of offer up that thing first.
Hmm.
But it doesn't work that way. You have to be the one who is willing to go first and to set the example. And like you can't reap the fruit
Hmm.
unless first, right, you dig up the dirt and
Yeah.
break up the ground, and that part
Yep.
is really uncomfortable, right? When
Yep.
the
Hard
the
work.
ground is really firm because it
Yeah.
has not been touched, you got to dig that up, and that part is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Then you got to plant the seed.
Yep.
Then you got to wait. Then you reap the fruit,
Yeah.
right? But we have this whole Amazon Prime mentality where we just want to
Mm.
get the results right now.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that work first. And I think
Hmm.
that sets people up for a lot of disappointment. But in my experience, if you're willing to do it in the proper order,
Hmm.
right, where you dig the dirt, you plant the seed, you serve, you reap the fruit, right?
Yeah.
That's when you really get that satisfaction and that fulfillment and that
Hmm.
joy that can't be taken away from you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also, when you think about that, I love that, planting and reaping the fruit analogy, because I think a lot of times with what you're saying, culturally around us, or kind of if we're expecting other people to go first, it's a really selfish position to take, right? Where I'm kind of expecting to get a lot of things, but I'm not really thinking about what am I giving, right? What am I also offering? And so, when you think about breaking up the ground, planting the seed, waiting, right, watering it, yeah, then you got to tend to the plant. Right? Fruit doesn't just pop out of the ground. Right? Like you got to tend to that plant, let it grow, make sure it's getting what it needs still. That's a lot of outward focus.
Yeah.
Right? And what am I giving, and what am I extending, and what am I providing? And it's not a lot. I mean, I guess, in the end, you could think like, well, what am I getting out of this? But if that's your only focus, you're going to get really frustrated along the way waiting for that fruit, because there's a lot of work to come in. And, the first time a plant grows fruit, it's probably not going to be that big. It's probably not going to be a lot. It takes years of cultivating those plants to get the harvest that you're talking about. So it's really changing a perspective outside of myself again into what am I giving? What am I offering? What am I serving? Because I think whether it's with our kids, with our spouse, with our friends, right, that shift away from it's all about me to, okay, I'm giving, I'm focusing out, I'm giving on other people, is going to change the way that we relate with people and change our experience in that process, right? Leading to that joy that you're talking about. So
Yeah. I think it's really important too that people follow the advice of a good farmer and the appropriate farmer, right? So if we're going to roll this analogy out a little further, if you are trying to grow apples and you are following the advice of a carrot farmer, okay, you are not going to be a good judge of the results. And the steps that it takes to grow carrots is going to be very different than steps that it takes to grow apples.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to be looking for fruit in the ground, and it's not going to be there. It's going to be over your head.
Yeah.
But it's really important that you follow the right advice for your life and for what you're looking to do. Because I think there's a lot of people who will go find these random people on the internet and say, hey, that guy he looks happy. Let me just do exactly what he's doing, and realize that ultimately it's not going to give you the joy and the satisfaction you want in your life because you're following the wrong set of rules. Right? Go back and read the Bible. Start there.
Right.
Right. There's a pretty good rule book that's already been written. Start
it is,
there.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of good info in there, and you can find pretty much the answer to literally any question you'll ever have if you go look. But we don't want to do that because it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Right. And
it's easier to Google. Just Google it. Yeah.
But that's what leads us to this life of frustration and disappointment, and we continue to say, hey, why am I having these results? Why am I unhappy? Why am I upset? Why am I feeling this way? And why can't I break out of that cycle? Maybe let's look at the inputs. Let's break it down and stop doing things like we want to do them. Right? Let's submit. Let's surrender. Let's stop trying to control all the uncontrollables and just show up.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's John Eldridge who writes about or talks about, like, we're all disciples to something. And right now, most of the time, we're disciples to the internet. Right? This process in our life where we've trained ourselves to, like, if I don't know, I can just get it. If I don't have it, I can just get it. Yeah. That instant gratification, Amazon Prime mentality that you mentioned earlier. When in actuality, the human experience is about a process, is about going through something, right? Not necessarily just attaining it. And what we're robbing ourselves from by cutting ourselves off from the experience and just jumping to the end result. I think it's even a comedian. I can't remember their name, so it's a horrible reference. But they talked about, it's like, you used to, if you didn't know the answer to something, you had to go to a place called a library. And you had to look for a book and hope that they had it. And then you had to read through that book. And then you remembered it because you had all of these steps that you went through. But now we're just like, I don't know. Who is that person? And then you just look it up and then you immediately forget because it's not important. You didn't have to work at it to get any of that information. So, yeah. And it can become a difficult landscape to really grow and mature in. Right? And so I think having these kind of conversations is great because you start to slow down and really take examination of the ground. Right? Okay, well, what am I doing? Am I actually working to break up this ground? Right? Or am I just being like, that sounds a little hard. I'm going to go buy some fruit at the store. Right? So, I think it's important, like you said, to have these kind of conversations. And I don't think they happen enough.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I strongly agree. And I think, the other part of that too, which, you made me think of in what you're talking about there, is what we get from the process. right? Because I feel like a lot of people overlook that part too, and they just look at the end result and forget about everything that happens along the way in going through the process,
Yeah.
right? I think if you were to take your 3-year-old kids and hand them the keys to your car and say, all right, here, go drive, it's probably not going to end well.
No, it would start really
But
well. They would love it. Yeah.
if instead you give them another 15 years of them watching you drive,
Mm.
of them seeing how you handle situations, of them being an observer,
Yeah.
right, of experiencing situations and going along with it, not necessarily being the one in control, but observing and taking mental notes,
Mm.
and then, hey, it's your turn, they're going to get a much better bet. And all of
Yeah.
us are 3-year-old kids looking for the keys to the kingdom right now.
Mm.
That's what I feel like.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we gotta be a little bit more patient and be willing to do the work
Mm.
first, and right, just
Yeah.
soak it up,
Mm.
enjoy all this stuff. Because I'll tell you what, 6 years ago, I thought I was on top of the world. I thought I had everything I could possibly want.
Yeah.
And it humbled me a lot to lose a lot of those things and realize that like the stuff that I thought was important really wasn't.
Mm.
And I'm in a situation now where life is so much more beautiful than I ever thought it could be. I've got deeper relationships. I've got more stuff now than I ever possibly could have imagined then. And I
Wow.
work way less.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I get to have these experiences where in the other room right now, my kids are having a dance party. They're having fun. Right. And that's one of the joys of being able to
Yeah.
be around your family and enjoy the fruit of your life.
Yeah.
But I couldn't have possibly skipped the 6-year period where I spent intensely working on myself and dying to myself to remove the things that I thought I was.
Mm.
Right. But we can't skip over that part. And I think that that's
Yeah.
great encouragement.
True. Yeah, and I love your story about the cake, right? Like, I mean, that's such a vivid imagery of the just like that half birthday cake. Like that
Yeah.
that really stuck with me, and yeah, the whole process, man. Just yeah, it's powerful, and I love that you have such a great story to share, and that you're so open about it, because. Like you said, I guess it would be, kind of nice to just skip all the 6 years of hard personal work, right? But then would you really be enjoying what you have now?
Right.
Right. But yeah, I think that's awesome.
Thank you. I think my favorite part of that really painful memory is the thought of what are you coming home to? Because, when I tell this story to somebody that hasn't heard it before, again, I got home at 8:45 at night, right? And you come home and I'm like, hey, let's sing happy birthday. My wife pulls out the half-eaten birthday cake, and that's when my heart sinks. But the part that you kind of skip over there is opening up the front door and walking into the house. And I use that as a little mental cue to myself that what are you walking home to? Like, you go out into the world and you go invest the time that you were not guaranteed to have, right? You and I are very fortunate to have woken up today to be here and have this conversation in the first place.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah.
And we are investing this time right now into other people. This is not a conversation about, hey, how can you and I serve each other and get something out of this? I don't honestly think you and I really have much to gain out of this conversation. We are using this conversation to help other people better their lives. So I know that when I come home at the end of the day, whatever time it is, and I open that front door and I walk into my life, what am I walking into? And I feel like there's a lot of people who, at the end of their day, when they come home from whatever it is that they go do, and they walk in the front door, they walk into what? Right? And that's a good question to ask yourself at the end of the day when you open that front door. How do you feel? Because that is a much bigger and much more important definition of success than whatever else exists on the outside.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so easy for guys in particular, whether it's defining success or really defining themselves by what can I do and what have I accomplished, and if it's kind of this like endless striving. Kind of like I could always be better, which is good to improve yourself. But when when my worth and value is dependent on my ability to perform, like, I'm not going to be able to do everything this way forever.
Right.
Like my
That's
body has, yeah.
a lot of men define themselves as their accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I would say a lot of people don't know who they are authentically to even judge that by. Who I
Agreed.
am is just my job, my car, my career. It's
Yeah.
my bank account. That's who I am.
Yeah.
That's not who you are. You were
Right.
not designed that way.
Yeah.
You weren't born with those things. Let's
Mm-hmm.
get back to who you were designed to be.
Yeah.
Right. And that's when you could really feel
Mm.
successful.
Yeah. And I hear about that all the time, right? Like those are things that we talk about in therapy with countless people. Right? They feel this disconnect and dissatisfaction in life. They've been disconnected from who they've been created to be. Right?
Yeah.
They're now a human doing instead of a human being, and helping people work through that and reorganize priorities. I mean, I love doing that, obviously, right? Because but it could be challenging, right? Because we've both had to do it personally, right? Where you're faced with a situation where it's one moment or several moments where you begin to realize, like, wow, this is not what I thought it was, and this does not have the same importance as it once did, and that restructuring of priorities and that restructuring of even understanding who you are is hard but worth it. Right?
Yeah.
Back to your plant analogy. Right? It's
Yeah.
hard work, but it's worth it.
I love that. Well, I know we're kind of ending our time here, so I just wanted to again honor you for being here. It means a lot, especially knowing how little you and I have to gain from this conversation, other than knowing that we made a bit of an impact. So I genuinely appreciate you taking the time out of your day to have this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. I've loved getting to know you, and this has been a great conversation.
Thank you. Can I ask you a favor before we go?
Yeah, sure.
Would you pray us out?
Yeah, I'll pray us out.
Let's do it.
All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that you have given us, because it was not promised, it was not guaranteed, but you have, in your infinite wisdom, decided to bless us with yet another day, to be here, and to connect with each other. And so, God, I thank you also for Jim and the work that he is doing through this podcast, and the words of life and truth that you're able to communicate across the country, across the world, right, through the digital platform. And so I thank you for the work that he's doing and the work that you're doing in and through him and the life of his family. Father, if we talked about anything that was good today, we give you credit for that, because ultimately this is not about either one of us, but this is about who you are, what you're doing in the life of your people in this world, and how you're calling them back to yourself. And so, Father, we thank you for being a part of that process. We thank you for the honor of being able to be in that position. And we just ask that anything that we've said or done bring glory to your name and not our name. And God, I pray for those who are listening, that if they are in the struggle right now, that you would meet them there. And if they are in the joys of life, that you would also meet them there. God, that they would be enriched and fulfilled, not just from this conversation, but from your presence and your work in their life. And Father, we are so thankful that you continue to choose to pursue after us, even when we are far from you, and that you have gone the greatest distance, all the way to the cross, to bring us into relationship with you. And so we can never say thank you enough for that. Father, we love you, and we ask that you would continue to give us your eyes and your ears for your people, and your feet to walk the path in front of us, and your courage and passion to follow you into it. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. You've blessed me today in more ways than I can say, and I know that you've blessed our audience too. So again, just want to thank you for that service.
Yeah.
I appreciate it greatly.
Yeah, well, thank you as well. I've really enjoyed this. It's definitely been the highlight of my day so far. So,
thank you.